Hello, I think I am live. This is how every live stream starts. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. So welcome. I'm about to introduce what's going to happen in this very special extra, kind of a surprise, but not really a surprise, live stream. Please, if you happen to be one of the first people tuning in live to this, if you could let me know if the audio sounds okay in the chat. And not spoiler alert, I have a guest with me. Jane, if you could just say, hello, my name is Jane, just to hear if your mic is working.
Hi, my name is Jane.
Okay, so let me know in the chat, could you hear me and could you hear Jane? I see that there's Trevor Clark in the chat. Okay, I'm going to assume yes, perfect, great. Okay, so I think I'm just going to get started. Wow, this is like the fastest I've ever started a live stream ever. It hasn't even been 1 minute yet. So my name is Dan. This is yet another live stream on this YouTube channel that currently doesn't have a name. And this is a very special episode. For those who have been following my channel, one of the things that I've talked about a lot, but haven't done too much with, but have done a little bit of experiments with, is having more guests as part of this YouTube channel. So the first, I had an interview that you may have watched with Claire Kearney-Volpe and Chancey Fleet about accessibility and code. And just today, I published a tutorial by Tiga about working with physical sensors and P5GS. So now today, this is the first ever live streamed guest. I even in fact have 2 microphones working. So that's a pretty big innovation for me technically. And today's guest is right here. Well, she's not right here, but her name is right here. She's right over there. Jane Friedhoff. We have this awkward thing where she's standing out of the camera, and then we're going to exchange places. Jane Friedhoff. Jane is an independent game developer. I encourage you to check out her website, which will be linked in the description of this video after it gets archived online, to see the games that she's made and the other kind of research and data and visualization projects that she works on. And so I think what's particularly exciting about this for me, is just to have different voices as part of the channel, talking about code and projects and things that they make. And then also, I've done a lot of tutorials about how to program stuff and graphics and animation and logic, and even a few quick and dirty hey, let's make Space Invaders or let's make Flappy Bird type tutorials. But I think thinking about the broader context of game design and what it means to actually build a game, to release a game, what kind of themes and what kind of stories you can tell with games, and what goes into actually being an independent game developer, I think is an exciting and interesting, different perspective than something that I have to offer. So I'm going to take this laptop with me over there, and I'm going to, I'm introducing Jane, but I'm going to bring her in to talk to you. She'll talk for a little bit, and then what I'm going to be doing over there is watching the chat. So if you have questions or things you're thinking about that you want to ask Jane when she finishes a short presentation, then we'll just have a brief conversation. I'll ask some of the questions from the chat. This is the first time I've tried this, so we'll see how it goes. So thank you for being here and watching. Thank you, Jane, for being here and trying this experiment with me. And now, without further ado, Jane, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Dan. I'm going to awkwardly slide in here. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the live stream. It's really amazing to be here. I love Dan's videos. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of my influences to become a game designer. When designers talk, sometimes we just stick to individual games that we like. And I grew up in arcade games. My earliest memories are all in arcades, playing The Simpsons or Marvel or Dance Dance Revolution. But we don't necessarily talk about exactly what spurred us to be there. Me just saying that I love Grand Theft Auto, which I did for a really long time, doesn't really explain why I got into games. And I feel like it's really interesting to hear about what inspires us about the field that we're in. And so hopefully this will shed a little bit of light on the stuff that I do. Maybe you'll notice some themes in the work that you all do. But yeah, so let's get started. So like I said, Jane Friedhoff, I'm going to talk a little bit about my interests and my influences. And one of the things that was really exciting to me in thinking about this is that sometimes you don't really get the chance to talk about what inspires you, especially if you're a person, maybe a woman or a person of color in games. People ask you a lot about what's it like to be, a person in games, rather than what brought you here. And I love hearing the stories of what brings people to this field. And one of the things that really brought me to this field was this belief that games can tell stories, maybe through narrative, also through mechanics, in a way that really affects people deep down, that really gets them right in the gut. And there's a kind of communication that you can have with people. The same with like an amazing song or an amazing book, where you realize that this thing expresses for you something that you didn't even realize that you thought in the first place. And I think that's super exciting, right? Like to me, that's why games are as much an art form as any other, right? Because they can do the same thing for us. And I'll tell you about the thing that did that for me in a minute. Oh, where's my mouse? First live stream. Okay, cool. So also as game developers, we don't really talk about the ways that we mess up, right? Sometimes we make some really bad games. And although I have many prototypes that were like true garbage, the one that I'm going to talk about right now is something that I realized later on was a game. There was something that I used to do when I was a kid. So like if you asked me when I actually started to be like a proper game developer, I'd say, okay, well, maybe when I was 17, I was interning at games companies. Maybe when I was 22, and that's like when I started to really like have stuff in shows. But sometimes I think back to this game that I used to play with myself, where I kind of thought about it as this game called Face Mush. And the idea was that, so you take your hands and you try to get your face to look like a model's face, right? So high cheekbones, big eyes, and all those sorts of things, right? And you sit in front of the mirror and you try and you try and you try to look like what everyone tells you that you should look like, right? And the win condition for this terrible game was that you do that for the rest of your life, right? And it's not really the kind of game you could win. But I realized it was the kind of game I was playing with myself all the time. And it wasn't because I grew up with people, you know, with like bad influences or anything. I had family that was super supportive, lots of people who took zero guff. But there was this kind of messaging that was affecting me, and maybe it's affected some of you too, that was telling me that I wasn't enough. You know, something about me had to change, that there was this bar and I was down here, right? And something had to give, right? And it wasn't going to be the rules. And, you know, whether that's through advertising or whether that's through the messaging that you get through society, you know, that's there for most of us in different ways. So I would like try to get this performance right and feel less and less real as I screwed it up. And I really hated it, but it was really hard to see any other options. It was hard to imagine any other way out. This may not seem like it links up to games, but I think you'll see the link in a second. So I don't know what changed, right? I was this kid, this insecure kid, feeling a lot of pressure from the outside world, and a lot of messages from society telling me that I had to be or not be a certain way. But one day I just had this like series of revelations out of nowhere. And I'm going to use Keanu Reeves to help me demonstrate them. Is that the right direction? How do I not go into Keanu's face? So I knew that I didn't meet a lot of these standards, right, that society had set for me. But all of a sudden I also realized, like, most people don't, right? You kind of never see anyone where they hit the standard and then they're done, they win. You know, those standards can always change. The rug can be pulled out from you at any time. And if the rug can be pulled out from you at any time, it means, okay, well, those things that are expected of you kind of don't really matter. You know, they shift, they change, they go back and forth. They're decided arbitrarily by other people, right? And they're sort of just done because they can. And so if those people were able to make up rules for me, I realized that there wasn't any real reason why I just couldn't go ahead and make up my own rules, right? So like my rules for how I want to live, for what I think is important, might not win, right? Like we're not like living under the like United States of Jane or anything, but they would at least be a respite from a lot of this other stuff going on. Through rules, through my own valuations, I could kind of create my own little world. And if I can make my own rules, I can value whatever, right? I got told a lot that I was too loud or too weird or my hair was too curly or my nose was too big. But in my world, with these rules creations, I can make it so that being loud was good and taking up room was good and having curly hair was good. Actually, I haven't made a game about curly hair yet, but maybe I will. So I realized through this rule creation, I could create these sort of like alternate settings in which I could value the things that I wanted, right? And if I am super stoked about this, which I was, this idea of creating this sort of alternate world for a period of time where I could be myself, if I was stoked about that, there was no way that other people also weren't super pumped about that, right? I think most of us can relate to this idea of not always being able to be or express the people that we want to be. And so if I'm super excited by the idea of using rules to make a separate world, then probably a lot of other people are into that too. And so if I can do that, then I should do it, right? And it just like hit me all of a sudden. It was like my like Keanu Reeves like, whoa moment. But I looked like this, so it kind of looked like this. I don't know if I'm doing it right. So my mind was blown. It was ridiculous. I don't know exactly why it happened, but it did. And I had this series of revelations, and I was super, like, totally drunk off it. It felt like my world had been shaken up in this fundamental way, right? This idea that through the usage of different, like, rules and different settings, we can create these alternate spaces for ourselves, in which we can play with things, in which we can be ourselves and do the things that we want to do and value the things that we want to value. And at the same time, I had absolutely no idea what to do with it. I was like 15 years old. I didn't know what to do with anything at that point. And the closest thing that I could think about was sort of like the ethic of punk or culture jamming. But those didn't really seem to like connect with me super hard for whatever reason. There we go. But not after that, I discovered Riot Girl. And Riot Girl like totally blew my mind. It was super transformative for me to come across a group of other people, especially, I think it's pipes.
Okay.
Filming live from Brooklyn. Oh no, we're in Manhattan, aren't we? Moving all around. Is that pipes?
Is that?
Should I keep going?
Yeah, probably. I don't see anyone in the. What is that sound?
Does anyone else hear that water sound?
It's coming from. Is it possibly coming from your computer? But
No, I don't think so. This was gonna be my big denouement. No, just kidding.
how are you hearing that? Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
Well, they do hear it in the chat. Hold on, I don't.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. We're taking a brief pause for a second to figure out what's making this crazy, extra weird sound. Is it? Let me see if it's something on this computer.
Yeah.
Because it's coming out of this computer's. Hold on.
I can't imagine what would be over here. Oh my God.
What?
Wait, is this? What's that? Live stream. No,
What
wasn't
is that sound? Hold on. It's. Hold on. Let's see. Let's.
Should I
Just for the
unplug
sake,
this?
let me mute some of the audio sources. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm like totally like at a loss for what to do. No. No. That is the weirdest.
This is so bizarre.
Quit. Let me just. I don't know why, but I had something running called Air Server, which is like, I wonder if somebody's like white noise iOS app was like airplaying into this
Oh my
computer or
God.
something. That was a little bit crazy, which maybe is appropriate
That's
for this
wild.
slide.
Yeah.
Okay, we can go on and continue. Everything should be
Whoa,
okay now.
that was
I'm
wild.
going to turn my mic back off. Okay.
Okay, cool. Whoa, like what?
Sorry to kill your momentum.
No, it's fine. It's fine. No worries. But so basically, for me, what this thing was Riot Girl, right? And Riot Girl was this sort of punk rock feminist movement that was very much about women making art that represented them and represented their lives. It had a lot of issues, right? Like, I was kind of its target demographic. Like, it had like race issues, class issues, but still, for all of its faults, it really like gave voice to this set of emotions that I had about the world that I didn't know how to process, and these values that I didn't really know how to articulate. And so there's this thing called the Riot Girl Manifesto, and for that really like totally hypnotized me. And there were a couple of lines that really spoke to me. I really like the line, because we girls want to create mediums that speak to us, right? This idea that we're gonna create art and music and zines and that sort of thing that speak really to us as people. Because anytime we get anything done, we are creating the revolution, right? Which is really nice. And maybe the most important one to me, because I need laughter and I need girl love, right? This idea that these experiences can bring us together, right? And so seeing these people try to cultivate these things made me realize I wanted to do it too. But for me, like, if you know me in real life, you definitely don't want to hear me play music. I'm not a very good artist either. All of the art in these slides have been done by an artist friend of mine because it's not a good look when I try to do it. And for me, what I had been really interested in up to that point was game design, right? And I don't even mean like super artsy fartsy game design, right? At this point in my life, I was like playing a lot of Grand Theft Auto. I was playing a lot of like Katamari Damacy. I was playing a lot of Rez, a lot of like weird little games. But these ideas, well, Grand Theft Auto isn't a weird little game, but you know what I mean, a big span of games that weren't necessarily about this. But I sort of had a moment where I wondered, could there be a meeting point here, right? In games, basically a lot of what we're doing, regardless of like the content of the game, regardless of whether we like dub it an art game or an indie game or a serious game, we're trying to use mechanics to tell some story about the world, right? Our mechanics value certain things. Maybe they're like a little bit more wild in one game, a little bit more tame in another, but regardless, they're sort of pointing at a world that could exist, right? Or that does exist for a little while. And to me, Riot Girl also pointed at this, right? You go to a Riot Girl show, you hop in the mosh pit, you sing along, and you kind of have this feeling of connection, that you're in this alternate world for a second. And so I kept wondering, like, there's not really a lot of like Riot Girl games, right? This happened in the 90s, so, I mean, probably some of you are younger than me. To me, that's like, you know, when I was growing up. And I really started to wonder, you know, not a lot of people were making, you know, wasn't like a flourishing indie culture back then. So I started to think, how could we combine this, right? How can we mash this up? And so this question nagged at me all throughout college, into law school, and then out of law school a year later when I dropped out, and then finally into design school, and then the indie scene. If anyone ever like pretends to know what they're doing, I can promise you that 99% of us don't. But when I sort of arrived at design school, I realized I wanted to take the things about the genre that I found so transformative and start applying their ideas directly to the mechanics of games. And so for me, what that meant was to make games that had certain values, right? Like I was talking about with the first terrible game that I made. I wanted to create games that had particular values, that cared about certain things in like the weird little game world that they created, that focused on these things like deliberately being messy sometimes, right? Giving yourself the space to be messy, be ridiculous, be over the top. We don't really get that a lot. Creating these like very expressive spaces goes along with messiness. Sometimes being expressive is messy. Creating relationships through art, not just with the art. You know, I didn't really want to make stuff where people would just look at it and then walk away. I wanted to make something where people would sort of interact with each other through it, like being in a mosh pit at a Riot Girl show. And I really wanted to communicate with my audience directly, not trying to like explain them to anyone else. So I'll show you two games that I made. I mean, I've made a lot more games other than this, but there are two games that I've made that I think really kind of speak to this spirit and this ethos. So this first one, this is a still from a game called Screwup. And Screwup is basically a two-player knockoff of Space Invaders, but with two very crucial differences. So it's played with a Kinect and a microphone. It's two-player, you work together. So in order to move, you hold this mic in your hand, and you're tracked by a Kinect. So I don't even know if I have enough space over here. So you have to run laterally, oh, there I go, into the void, across to move your ship. And you have to scream into a microphone in order to shoot. I have a video. Let's see if this works. Yeah, is this gonna play? Where's my head's in the way? Oh. No, it's okay. Oh, I'm just gonna hide. I'm gonna hide. I'm gonna awkwardly slide back into the video. So, you know, I could talk about like the design choices in this game and the ways of hooking the tech up together, and all of that is important. But for me, what I really wanted was to create a win condition in a game, right? And a win condition just meaning something that you do to win. Oh, I didn't make this video. I'm gonna close that. Cool. Then I'm gonna that. Cool. Okay. So a win condition is just something that you do to win a game, right? You want to score the most points, or whatever. And the thing about them that's kind of great is that they sort of inherently justify whatever mechanic you use to achieve them, right? Like if you think about it, most of the games that we play are pretty silly, right? Why do we play golf instead of just picking up the golf ball, walking over to the hole, and dropping it in, right? Why do we use, I was gonna say golf bats, oh my God. Why do we use them, right? Like why do we use drivers and putters and that sort of thing when it's totally ridiculous, right? Well, we use them because the rules of the game require that we use them. And so we're gonna use them, of course, right? We have to, if we're gonna win, we gotta use them to hit the thing into the hole. And so for me, I sort of realized like I could take all these things that I really liked, people being loud, people being messy, people having fun with each other, people like running around in real life, slamming into each other. And I could kind of justify creating that alternate little space if I just made a game about it, right? And so what I really felt was, especially being told as a kid that I was like too loud or took up too much space or leaned side to side too much, I could take something that I felt self-conscious about in real life and just translate it into a game mechanic, right? Giving me and other people this sort of release valve and this place to explore that kind of expression. And I remember it was really gratifying because I brought this game to an outdoor festival and I was sort of like, as with every game that I make, I was like, maybe only I think this is good, maybe everyone else will hate it. So, people in Manhattan are cool, they walk around, they look like they don't really care, whatever. But this like really steady flow of like initially, very cool hipster people came by, they would play it. And all of a sudden they would like turn into feral animals, right? They would be screaming, climbing on each other, laughing, shoving, pushing. And that was something I noticed didn't really end with the end screen. The end screen would come up and they would laugh, they would be hoarse, and they would look at each other and they would look at me and say thank you. And you could see that they had this kind of glint in their eye. It's like really excited, like they had unlocked something. And, I don't want to say that games, totally influence behavior, or don't totally influence behavior, but I think they can give us little spaces to be ourselves and to like discover different facets of ourselves. And so it was really nice for me to grow up as a Riot Girl in mosh pits and then to see people leave my game with the same kind of like glint in their eye that I had coming out of those shows. My most recent release is a game called Slam City Oracles, and it's really tried to like infuse the whole thing with this practice. One of the reasons I made Slam City Oracles, which is a 2-player arcade game, is because installation games are really hard. It turns out sometimes if the sun goes down, your Kinect will break, and no one tells you that in advance, and there are 50 people who want to play your game at an outdoor festival, and you figure it out. So I really wanted to make something that could run on its own, just go off into the world, not need me to attend to it. But basically, the idea behind Slam City Oracles is that sort of like if you mashed up GTA and Katamari Damacy. So you and your best friend, it's a 2-player collaborative game, smash up this city to this Riot Girl soundtrack done by a local band. So I'll play you, oops, not thank you yet, soon, but not yet. I'm gonna escape that. Oh, don't look at my notes, there's spoilers. It's funny to like try to do it. Over here. Where's my head? Okay, good. Oh, by the way, if you have photosensitive epilepsy, please look away because there's lots of blinking lights. Thank you. One of my proudest achievements was that I actually released on time, which I really did not think was going to happen at all. That was kind of a miracle. Thanks to everyone who helped me do it, because I definitely did not do that alone. All right, I'm gonna put the presentation back here. All right, so this was a really great experience because I got to work with and paying people is great, a lot of people who had a lot of the same values as I did with regard to like making art that feels very much like this Riot Girl experience. And again, if you couldn't tell from the video, the way that you win is you cause as much chaos as you can. So you slam down, you make things fly around. When you go up higher from a slam, you can slam down again. That makes it go even higher. More things fly all around. You have 2 minutes basically to cause as much destruction as you possibly can. And again, for me, I really enjoyed this process of making a win condition that valued the things that I wanted to value, right? Like one of the major tenets of Riot Girl was taking up space, right? This idea that you don't shrink back, you don't try to like lower your voice, you don't try to just accommodate people around you, you take up space. Metaphorically, often, in some cases literally, right? Like in this game, it's all about taking up space. It's all about like the impact of your physical self on the world. And another thing that really inspired me about this too is, and I feel like this is a facet of the way that we think about like games that are serious or emotional or artsy. But this was actually a game that was really inspired by feeling like really vulnerable, right? Really lonely. There aren't a ton of women game developers. There are a lot more now, which is awesome. And I mean, I love all game developers. They've been amazing like mentors and influences all my life. But there was a period of time where it felt really strange to be a woman in games. And I kind of fantasized about this place where I would just be invincible, right? You know, cool me, better Jane, wouldn't be afraid to take up space. You know, would basically be invincible to anything else around her. And so for me, kind of like with Screwup, which was all about giving yourself the excuse to take up space and be loud and basically run around and scream like you probably haven't done since you were about 5 or 6. This was very much about reclaiming a moment of feeling powerful, of feeling connected with other people, and getting to mess things up. And so I think it's funny, like, you know, we have these really like intense delineations about like what is art, or what is like serious or emotional. We tend to think about it as like, oh, it has to be super autobiographical, right? But to me, I really enjoy games that are sort of born out of the ways that people want to see the world, right? Like, and this is just the way that I see the world. I'm sure that the people who are watching this channel all have their own influences and all have their different ways of seeing the world. And I think one of the really exciting things about games is that, again, through this process of making rules, through this process of sort of setting the narrative, and through this process of determining what is it? Like, what is the win condition? What's the win condition for you? Like, what makes you happy? What would be an interesting thing that you would want to do? Like, it sounds kind of corny, I get it, but I think there's something really cool about making games about that, because they kind of create these weird little, like, temporary utopias, right? Where everything is different. And in examples like this, it's only different for about 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. It's a short song. Also, it hurts to just slam the button over and over again. But you get to kind of create this alternate world where the stuff that you like, that you value, that you care about matters. And what's even better is that with games, you get to see other people experience it and see when they care about the things that you care about, that you think matter. And for me, whenever I see people get that feral glint in their eyes, for me, that's my judgment for knowing that I've done something right. So that's pretty much what I had to say. I appreciate all y'all bearing with me through the technical difficulties. Danny, come on over, I guess.
Okay. I have a lot of questions actually from the chat. So
cool.
I'm gonna try. We're gonna sort of like just rearrange ourselves. You can leave that there.
Okay.
I mean, we don't need. I think that's a nice background. I'm gonna stand a little bit off to the side here.
Yes.
So I'm gonna try. So first of all, in the chat, I'm kind of keeping an eye on the chat. And first, thank you, Jane. This was awesome.
Thank you.
I've seen some of your work before. It was so great to hear like sort of stories behind it, and I think really just like super fun and interesting themes and exciting stuff. So I have. Oh boy, now there's even more. People lots of positive feedback in the chat. People really like the Scream 'em Up game,
Nice.
and so okay.
It's so fun.
So and people are saying lots of thank yous now. So I think what I'll try to do we haven't tried this before, so I'm kind of learning how to figure this out. But I'm going to ask. I noted down a bunch of the questions, so I'm just going to kind of go through them in sort of, I'm going to start with some of the technical ones first.
Yeah.
So a bunch of people had asked, like, what kind of programs, what kind of programming languages, what tools do you use to make these games or other games?
Yeah, totally. Should I look at you? Should I look at the
I
camera?
don't know. Both. You look
Like
at me, I'm back
oscillate,
at the camera.
yeah.
Oscillate.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
you can look at me.
If you, the audience,
We'll
have
say
a preference,
hi,
let me know.
Tell us what looks good.
So I used Unity. Unity
Uh-huh.
3D is a game model, is a game development engine. You can use a couple of languages with Unity. I use C# because I had been working in like C++ before, and it seemed the most natural to me.
Right.
I primarily chose it because as a development team of one, Unity, I guess one of the reasons why it's called that, it exports to a lot of different platforms. So you can make a game and then it exports to Mac, to PC, to iPhone, to Android, to like, I think of like to BlackBerry. I feel like I've seen that, although maybe I'm like super hallucinating. But for me, it made a lot of sense because it really streamlined the workflow and let me, like I was able to make a Linux build of this game that worked.
Right.
Like without any hassle, which is not a sentence I've ever said about Linux.
And I know that Unity has like a free and a pro. Is a lot of the stuff you're doing like works under the free, or you need the pro for it?
Yeah, yeah. Totally.
Even the exporting is you don't need the pro for that.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I think it like changed. I think I'm like thinking about it in an old way because I think it actually is now kind of like all free.
Well, I think it's also like if your thing makes a certain amount of money, then you have to get pro.
Right.
I haven't hit that limit.
Yet.
No.
And the other thing I know, like in particular with like Slam City Oracles here, it
Yeah.
looks like there's a lot of physics built into that game. Is that stuff that you're using from the built-in physics engine?
Yeah. So Unity has really great physics both for 3D and 2D. I know some people make their own, but for me, it was definitely good enough. It handles it pretty nicely. There's like some garbage collection that I end up doing, but yeah, it just kind of works. It'll figure out where like. So if you like have colliders and stuff on objects, like the characters, you don't have to like trace that manually. It like figures it out for you, that kind of thing. I started building it in a different platform that didn't have the like GUI.
Right.
It was not great.
Everyone's saying, "Show us the code." Well, not today.
Oh my God,
probably.
you don't want to see the code. Trust me.
All right, so let's see. I've got some more thematic questions, but I'm gonna stick with some of the technical stuff.
Sure.
So we've covered this. I'm trying to like use people's names from the chat, but that first question, by the way, came from Jose. Thank you, Jose. And then, so one thing that I think is an interesting question that Ben asked in the chat. So in particular for like the Scream 'em Up game that you showed at like a festival, it requires the Kinect. Maybe you built that with.
That was
Unity?
with Open Frameworks.
With Open Frameworks, you mentioned that, Open Frameworks. So how do you like? Is there can the game find an audience beyond this sort of like festival or conference kind of circuit or just like an installation? Have you thought about that, or has that been like part of a struggle for you, or what's your thoughts on that?
No, it's a great question, and it totally depends. I think it depends on what your dev team size is, because it just the more platforms, the more like overhead you require people to do. So the process for running Screwup, if I remember correctly, because I made it a couple years ago, you have to get an app on your iPhone because the iPhone transmits the sound data to the computer. You have to hook up the Kinect to your computer. Then you have to make sure that they're both on the same network so OSC can communicate, and you have to make sure that like the port numbers and the IP addresses and everything all match up. And like, that is intense. That is a big ask. And automating that kind of thing is like totally possible. I'm trying to think about games that have done that before, but for me, it just wasn't really feasible.
Right.
Also, like I'm very selfish, and I mostly wanted to see people play the game.
Yeah. Well, and there are like a lot of you have to work at it, and you've got to apply, but there are a lot of opportunities, and a lot of time, a lot of these games are the most fun in the sort of like crowd public space kind of context.
Totally.
But I think it's an interesting thing to think about, like finding the audience, what's the right context for the audience, the economics of like all this stuff. It's like you're just putting this stuff out there for people to feel joy, which is a good thing, but also like, you want to be able to have a sustainable practice.
Yeah, this is why I don't make my money in games primarily. This is why I have other jobs.
So this is kind of a related question, I think, which is from Kirpal from the chat writes, how would you recommend someone in high school who likes coding and gaming to sort of get into the game industry or kind of get into internships, college, etc.? Is that question that's written.
That's a really good question. So I feel like the thing that's nice about games, at least nowadays, is that it's such a wide field that there's not necessarily one path.
Right.
I obviously took a pretty untraditional route through games.
I wrote down in my notes, law school, question mark.
Oh,
that was my, like, if I was going to have any questions, I just wrote law school, question mark. I had no idea that you went to law school. That's crazy.
Oh my God. It's like, this is the thing too, is that I feel like when we like are professional, you know, we have our CVs and our portfolios and it makes it look like we had anything figured out at any point in time. And I definitely did not. Like, anyway, that's like a motivational speech for another day. So what was the question again? It was
for a high school student.
Oh, how to begin? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think probably one of the best. So let's see. Two things come to mind. One thing is actually they're both related. So if you haven't done a game jam before, I would say that's actually a really amazing opportunity. One of my first, after interning in the games industry, I kind of got back into games through game jams. And if you haven't heard of a game jam before, basically it's when a bunch of people get together for usually between like 24, 48 hours. Some are longer, some are shorter. I once did a 1 hour game jam on stage, which I almost had a nervous breakdown. But it's really nice because it kind of forces you to make something. Like at the end of that 48 hours, you'll have something. You'll have made your first game or your second game or your 10th game, whatever. And it also gets you out and meeting people, right? It's really tempting, and I know I do this all the time as a developer, to kind of think, I'm the indie developer, I gotta like do everything, I have to make the art, I have to make the sound, this, that. And you'll find in these communities, which are bigger than you think probably, other people who are also interested, other people who probably think your idea is like awesome. So doing that together like gets you a portfolio piece, it gets you some experience prototyping, iterating, and to me that's the most important thing. Actually, the way that I got the internship that I got in high school in the first place, I mean it's a very different time 10 years ago, but it was because I had made a game with a team over, I want to say like a 6-week program, and some people from the games industry came. And they saw it and they liked it and they liked me and they were like, hey, do you want to intern for us? It was sort of like getting scouted as a model, except like way different. But yeah, and so I think that's one of the biggest things. You can go to like conferences and conventions too. Those are super helpful. But I often find that the people who show up there also show up to the game jams.
Right.
And it's a little bit easier. Like as someone who's like stood around with my little name tag and my drink, like wanting to talk to people but being too shy. It's a lot easier to go up to someone at hour 36 at a game jam and go like, hey, I know you, I like your work, and get a conversation started there.
Cool. A couple of people were just asking now, because you mentioned like you don't necessarily do independent game development full time.
Yeah.
Like what's your other like work that you do?
Yeah, I do all kinds of weird stuff. So primarily what I do is I prototype tools, which is not the most descriptive answer, so right now I work at a place called the Office for Creative Research, which is super amazing. Basically, we're a studio that does a lot of like data and data analysis and data exploration in a very like socially oriented way. So I just got off a project doing like a visualization of a census of elephants that took place over all of Africa.
Oh, this is like the Okongo.
No, that's a different one.
That's a different one.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that was when my boss almost got like attacked by a lion, which is a
I've
sentence
heard.
I never thought I would say. But
I'm staying here.
yeah, it's a good call. So it is like weird and different.
Yeah.
But I find that everything I do kind of orbits around people playing with each other. Like sometimes it's really explicit, like the scream 'em up, where you're like literally screaming and laughing and diving on each other like it's a game of football. But other times it's a little bit more subtle, and it's about like, how do people get curious? How do people explore things? And I'm really interested in that. I actually sometimes think about myself as more of like a play designer than a game designer, because that's what's really compelling to me. And there's not a value judgment there. We all need each other. But I find that that's what ties my practice together.
Awesome. Okay. Ooh, people are talking about game jams.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another question. I've got so many. Okay,
oh my God.
We're gonna go for we'll go for a little longer answers some more. I want to make sure I get to some of these. This comes up a lot in with my tutorials and stuff that I've done. People are always asking, we'll just turn a little background on here. Do you find that how much does like I'm rephrasing the question a little bit from my own question, but how much does like math play a role in what you're doing, and how much is that a struggle, how do you deal with that?
You guys pay attention and trig. Please pay attention and trig, because I didn't and I regret it so hard. No, it has a huge influence actually. Way more than I want to admit. And that's probably, honestly, why, to some degree, I rely on outside sources to get stuff done, right?
Yeah,
like, I'm not, I'd like to say that I use Unity's like engine because, oh, I didn't have time to write my own. But like, let's be real, I probably would not be able to write my own physics system. But
you don't need to realize your idea, and I think the point is like you have something you want to express and something you want to communicate, and sure, it's an interesting academic exercise, but if you understand how it works, you can make it express the idea, then that's great.
Totally. But like definitely, it helps a lot. I mean, it helps everywhere. The way that I see it popping up a lot is my partner. He does a lot of work with Perlin Noise. Have you covered Perlin Noise?
Yes, I have. I have
Very
a
nice.
whole
Check out the
tutorial
Perlin Noise
series,
tutorial.
the Perlin Noise playlist.
And so that is a way of making things seem really natural.
Yeah.
So sometimes, like if you want enemies to look like they have AI or they're moving around in a particular way, you can add that and it doesn't feel so static.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's sort of like, if I walk around like this, it feels a lot stiffer than me moving how I usually do. So like using noise, for example, is really important. That same partner has a unit circle tattooed on him because that's how much he loves string. So yeah, I mean, it's important, but my attitude towards this is that one, you realize your idea how you can. No one who matters probably is going to be like getting angry at you about your code for no reason if they have nothing to do with it. And like two, there's always Stack Overflow. Like, it's there for a reason, and you shouldn't feel like you have to figure this out all by yourself from the start.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so I want to ask a question which I think is particularly relevant, especially like in light of things that have been happening in the world, in this country, in the election last week. Jane and I are both wearing our safety pins here. So Juju writes in the chat, she wants to know if you've dealt with sexism in your career and also what you think our role as developers might be in resisting oppression and marginalization.
Yeah, that's an amazing question. And I should probably preface it with the fact that like I can only speak to my own experience, and there are some amazing critics who like come from different backgrounds than me. Like I obviously, like I have white privilege, right? Like that's just a fact. I went to like design school. That gives me like a certain level of class and education privilege. So I'm coming from there. I can't speak for everyone, obviously. But in terms of sexism, yes. It's interesting because it's pretty rarely, it's usually not people coming up to you and being like, get out of our playground, we don't like you.
Right.
But it's things like, I remember I was at a conference once, I had developed a game with my partner, he's a man, I'm a woman. We both were at the booth, we had to, it was a PlayStation Vita game. We had a Vita in front of each of us, and I noticed that people, primarily men, would line up to talk to him. So there was like a line, like 6 or 7 people deep, to talk to him to play his Vita. And literally no one would come to me. And even when people did, they'd be like, oh, are you the marketer? Are you the artist? And I was like, I did the AI. Like, and don't get me wrong. Again, God bless artists. I cannot make any of my work without them. This is not to denigrate artists or marketers, but I would get this over and over and over again, this sort of, people call them microaggressions, but this sort of like constant chipping away. It's like, oh, really? I was at the Game Developers Conference once wearing a badge from NYU Game Center, which has game in the title, the Game Developers Conference, which has game in the title, and developer in the title, where my title said developer. And someone came up to me and said, oh, so are you in games? And I was like, would you ask my boyfriend that? Like. So it's very weird, and it's something you kind of, people can get better at it. To some degree, you just have to like let it roll off your back a little bit. But it's hard, and I mean, it's really nice if you're a marginalized person of any stripe to find a community that understands you, and that's super helpful. And like you'll also find allies like where you don't necessarily expect. Like a lot, this sounds like the famous like sentence, but truly, actually, a lot of my most amazing allies are men, right? Who have gotten me like the most help and the most opportunities. But it is really nice to have spaces where people understand, I remember talking to people and then being like, oh, I guess I didn't realize that.
Right.
In terms of, what was the exact question?
Well, I think so I have a couple follow-up questions to this. Well, one, I guess, is like, so one of the things that with P5JS, which is a JavaScript framework that I do a lot of tutorials about, started by Lauren McCarthy, really started with this ethos of, the tool, no tool is neutral, and a
Yes.
tool like has the sort of biases of the creators, and it's
Yeah.
really important to have all voices at the table, and also creating like this place that can be a community
Yeah.
for people who might feel like, oh, I'm not included in open source
Totally.
projects. This could be a place where I could feel that way. And I guess I'm wondering, are there like online communities or websites or like a conference? I know there's like initiatives like Phoenix Perry's was working on Code Liberation.
I co-founded that
And
too.
you co-founded that too. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Jane and Phoenix, Code Liberation, which is a wonderful organization.
Yeah.
Are there other things that you can? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Oh my gosh.
Think of.
There's a ton.
We can add some links in the description. If
Yeah,
we,
that's a really great question.
yeah.
The ones off the top that I had, off the top of my head that I know, and again, they're mostly like women oriented because I am a woman and that's what I was looking at. Like I know Pixels is good. Girls Make Games is good. Code Liberation did a like collaboration workshop with Black Girls Code, which is an amazing organization. I keep thinking, I'm not totally sure. In terms of tools though, that's actually the most exciting thing to me about the last while in indie games, because like when the first game I ever made, aside from the one I talked about in the presentation, one of the earlier like programmed games that I can remember is like a text adventure written in some language that like super doesn't exist anymore. Like a lot of the people that I know made their first games on like MS-DOS, and I'll tell you, it's not the most user-friendly system. And what I think is great is that there's been this real explosion in tools that are available, and they really work with like a lot of different like genres that you want to do, but also a lot of different learning styles and thinking styles. So like, Twine for text games is very much about like connecting passages, or even like Game Maker has these sort of logic blocks. And actually you can have code blocks in there too, so as you start to like feel more comfortable, maybe you rely less on the logic blocks and more on the code blocks. Maybe you start watching some tutorials that teach you. But I think that's really amazing. Like I think that's totally spot on that no tool is like apolitical, and I actually think that's like it's really exciting when people make their own tools. But I think having like a biodiversity of tools is really great. Like it only supports more people making games.
Awesome. Let's see. I'm gonna just try to like wrap up in a minute. There's a bunch of questions. People are in the chat. Let's see. It is an interview. Blah, blah. Interactive fiction. Yes, interactive fiction. Okay. So one other. I guess so one other question I think is kind of actually is a good one to ask. Also asked by Jose is just about how long it takes you for any of these projects. Like each of these games, like how long did you work on them?
Yeah.
How do you allocate the time for that?
Totally.
What's that process like?
Mine is usually very unhealthy. So it really depends. There are a lot of games that I make at Game Jam, so those take a very short amount of time. There are games where I'll do a lot of work on them at first and then kind of like let life happen and then pick them up later. Slam City Oracles was kind of a totally ridiculous like thing that I could only do because I was young. Wait, it was like 2 years ago. Anyway.
Yes, that counts.
But I made it in like 6 weeks because I had a deadline that I couldn't miss. So I took a week of I took one of my weeks of vacation from work and I just worked on it the entire time. I wouldn't really recommend doing that. It's definitely really important to like balance self-care. I can show so what's kind of interesting, if we have a second, I'll show it because I kind of love it. Where did my video go? Where's my, oh, there it is, great. So something that I really like talk to people a lot about is how important it is to prototype and how like weird it is and how, sorry, okay, so the thing about Slam City, this is a blog post of mine called Finding the Fun, which you can see on Gama Sutra. Where is my mouse? So this is what Slam City Oracles looks like now. But what Slam City Oracles looked like when I started was this. Like literally that's it. This is not the most inspiring thing in the world, right? I remember prototyping this and being like, I'm a failure, I'll never make another game. This is like, what? How is this the only, oops.
It's just okay, it means a half an hour has passed.
Oh, gotcha.
Camera shuts off automatically.
Gotcha. And like this was it, this is where I started. And if I looked at other games, it was like, how does this stack up to Journey? Like, that's bad. But it's kind of necessary to start here. You find what you find is fun, right? Like I was playing this with my partner, and we kind of realized that this ridiculous little bouncing ball game, we kept doing it. We kept throwing each other up and slamming each other down. And so it can take a really long time to get through that iterative cycle, but it's
And how do
You'll
you
get there.
how do you fold in like user testing? Like, so
Yeah.
do you try to do that like continuously?
All the time.
Who do you just like gather your friends? Can you put stuff online to user test? Like,
Yeah. So what I typically do, it totally depends on like how big your audience is and like whether you're coding out of your bedroom or whether you have like a legit game development shop. But I user test at every turn,
Yeah.
and usually the way I frame it is for each prototype, I try to have that prototype address something.
Yeah.
Right? So is it fun to slam down? Is it fun to throw other people up? Turns out that second one was not fun. It was just confusing, right?
Yeah.
So I try to think of a very specific question that I can answer through code. I see if people respond to it, if it works. And if it doesn't, I throw it out.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of iterating. You buy a lot of pizza and beer for your friends. My Facebook messages about testing got way less coherent as the development went on. But there are also a lot of playtesting events.
Right.
I guess obviously not all of you are in New York City, but for example, in New York City, there are playtesting events that happen at Parsons, the New School for Design,
Right.
at the Game Center. I believe Playcrafting also has events. Basically, if you look up like indie game development in your city or playtesting in your city, I think you'll probably be surprised at what you find. And you can also send your prototypes to people,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Especially if you know them and you like their work, usually they'll be down because they were also like totally insecure about their projects once. I know I was and continue to be.
Okay, so wait, now I realized that I forgot that there were some questions posted on Twitter because I was like, oh, that's good, I have some questions just in case there are no questions, but there are so many questions in the chat. So, and some of them came from Angela, who I also see is posting in the chat. So
Cool.
let me go see if I can quickly go to my Twitter notifications
I feel
here.
like this is nauseating, so I'm gonna put this
And let me find some of these questions.
Oh, no.
Okay. So I think we've talked about some of these, but there are. So Angela, I'm going to ask two questions from at Angela Wyman on Twitter. One from Twitter and one from the chat. One is that do kind of like non-digital games, card games, role-playing games, board games, how do those play a role in your thinking, in your practice? I mean, I know for me, like I just love playing
Oh my God.
those kind of games, and often I'm thinking about making computer versions of them while I'm playing it. Of course, I never do that, but
Yeah, I love them. So I don't tend to make a ton of them, but they were definitely how I learned game design, and I feel like one of the reasons why they're so helpful is because they really force you to strip things down. And when I've taught game design before, I'll run into students, and I totally get it, this is why I got into games, where they're like, I'm gonna make a game, and it's gonna have this art, and this music, and this narrative, and I'm like, that's great, but what do you do?
right.
Or do you just have like a theme? And that's not bad, but I feel like starting with analog games really helps you like understand what mechanics work and what don't, right? Because you can't be like, oh, this deck of playing cards is going to be like so emotionally resonant that it will do all the work for me.
Right.
So that's really great. It really teaches you like about how to manipulate systems and how to like create those systems. I still make card games and like public space games occasionally. I made a game recently called Muscle-Bound Glory. And it's a game where, if you've ever seen like an 80s action movie?
Yes.
Where it's like, okay, just making sure. Where they have like the really cheesy lines when they like finally like pow the bad guy, you know what I mean? Like, I'm gonna treat you like garbage as I like kick you into disposal or whatever. So it's a game about that.
Right.
So you draw 3 cards. It's like a situation, a villain, and a weapon or something like that. I don't totally remember. And as a group, you have to try to, or well, individually, but you compete to make the best cheesy, punny line that you can.
Right.
And you kind of deliver them with like these, you know, poses and these like props and stuff. And it's just really goofy and ridiculous. It's a lot of fun, actually.
It sort of strikes me too that one thing that that I think is like kind of interesting to think about is also like if you're planning to make a digital game, like is there like a paper prototype version of it that you can make first? And that's a really great way to think through an idea.
Absolutely.
To like get user testing.
Yeah.
You know, I know like doing all these tutorials this fall about text analysis, and I'm often talking about like it actually is really good to just like get the physical book, open it, and like do the text analysis by reading the text that's in your mind and like making notes with a pencil, because that will sort of give you the clues to how the algorithm, how the code has to be written, and allow you to kind of like slow that pace down to like think through the problem.
That's totally
even
right.
just like pencil sketches and like swapping them out, and that's the kind of thing that I think is easy to forget when you're just like, I gotta program this, I gotta program this.
Definitely. Well, and it's so, like, relatively speaking, well, both in terms of materials and times, it's so much more low cost.
Right.
Like, I throw out way more game ideas than I do, and it's really nice to not waste, you know, a week, a month programming something and then find out that it's not any good, than to just do it in a paper prototype and be like, oh, well, this definitely doesn't work. And then be done with it and move on.
Oh boy, so many questions. So I think we probably need to wrap up soon. I think like an hour is a good amount of time for these to not overburden our guests here. But
let me on Twitter.
And so, but we'll give out all that information
sorry.
at the end. Oh yeah, no, you can give it out now. Yes, you definitely ask more questions to Jane on Twitter, but I do want to ask this other question from Angela, which I can't seem to find right now, but I saw it anyway. So, are there some people that are your kind of like major influences, or people that you really admire? I know this is one of these like put you on the spot questions.
I mean, there are so many.
So you can think of them later and tweet these names. But,
no, it's okay. I can do it.
People that you admire. I guess another way to phrase this question that might feel less like awkward to answer is like, hey, if you're interested in games, also check out like these other indie developers.
Oh my God, that's also a really hard question. So I'll start with my influences with my like inspirations, because I've thought about that a lot, because I'm like, oh, when am I ever gonna be as good as them? But Keita Takahashi is amazing. He is the developer of Katamari Damacy, if you've ever seen it. He did an amazing installation with Babycastles, where he basically dreamed up a bunch of like super weird installation games, and they executed them in this museum. So one of them was like a side-scrolling game, and if you've played a side-scrolling game, it's like maybe you're a ship over here, and you move through space, and the background moves behind you. Except this
tutorial about that.
Hey, there you go. But this side-scrolling game actually, instead of having the background scroll, the ship scrolled across about 5 or 6 monitors scattered throughout the space.
Oh, that's cool.
And to me, that was just so like. So I love that kind of stuff that plays with the form and the medium. I forget the guy's name, the developer of Rez. Rez is, it was like on the Dreamcast, which is like, oh my God, I'm so old. But it was a game that really attempted to sort of create the sensation of synesthesia, which is like, I don't think I can come up with a dictionary definition of synesthesia, but like the blurring of senses, you know? And so that was really amazing. That was one of the first like music games that really like totally struck me. So there's a lot of things like that. I could probably write a whole post on like the weird old games that I like. Oh man, in terms of current developers, this is way harder, because I would be heartbroken if I would. Can I punt this to Twitter?
Yeah, definitely.
God, okay.
So first of all, I think there's a lot of questions in the chat about like what programming language did you start with, what programming language should I learn, and so we did. Some of you might be tuning in late, you can kind of roll back when this archive gets published, and we did discuss some of that stuff about different tools that Jane is using. Somebody said I think I was like scratching the mic by accident. Okay, I should stop looking at. I have a problem of like looking at the chat, and I get very distracted by it. It's kind of a problem. I also have this bell, which I don't know what to do with, but I thought I needed a bell, and so I'm gonna use this bell as like a say thank you to Jane. So this was really awesome and like super inspirational and like really fun, good experiment and challenge for me to sort of think about guests and interviews and that type of thing. And I think I would say thumbs up, at least on your part. You did great.
This was amazing.
And so. If you guys are interested in learning more about Jane's work, you can go to her website, which is
janefriedhoff.com.
And also you can see her Twitter handle right here.
I'm gonna see. That's how my name is spelled.
So feel free to feel free to ask questions to Jane. Also, you can ask questions to me on Twitter. Send us your feedback. Write in the comments. And maybe, I'm going to have more guests, and maybe you can come back and we can, when you make a new game, you can show it, or you can, maybe I'll think about if there are some, I don't really do Unity, although I should learn that thing, but if I can think, what I like to sort of think about too is if there are like some themes that came up, if I can do some tutorials kind of like around those themes, maybe I'll think about that. So if anyone got an idea of like, oh, how do you do X from this video, then you can let me know. Very cool. That's my parting words. I have this really ridiculous thing that I do, which is that I'll put on this, I'll play you out with the redacted, edited blurs theme song and trailer. One of these days I'll have a new one. And thank you for tuning in. Thank you again, Jane.
Bye.
And
thank you.
So this video, by the way, as soon as it finishes, You won't be able to see it on YouTube, but sometime later tonight or tomorrow, it'll be back, and I'll post it on Twitter, and it'll appear in the feed, and that sort of thing. So thanks for watching. I always feel like I can't ever stop. But this one, look, it says 59 minutes and 11 seconds, which is just like perfect. So, and I apologize if I missed your question. Please write it in the comments, send me a tweet, send a tweet to Jane.
Totally.
Hopefully we can hear from anybody who got missed. Okay, so I'm going to hit, first I'm going to hit this. Okay.